Hi everyone, and welcome back to Stefan Livera podcast, brought to you by swan.com, the best place to buy Bitcoin. Joining me today to talk about stable channels is Tony Klausing. He is working on Bitcoin development, and we're going to chat about stable channels. So first of all, welcome to the show.
Thanks for having me, Stefan.
So great. So look, there's a lot of different use cases and things, being built out there in the quote unquote crypto world, and obviously stable coins, is probably one of the big ones that outside of Bitcoin hodling is one of the major uses for people. And I know this is something you're working on. So do you want to just give us a quick, background on yourself, and then we can sort of get into stable channels?
Sure. So I've been involved in Bitcoin for a number of years. And I first started working on Bitcoin in the early 2010s. I was working on a crowdfunding website. And my co-founder on that website was an early Bitcoin adopter and introduced me to Bitcoin. And we implemented it for payments on this website way back in the day. And then so I was really lucky to have a technical introduction to Bitcoin from that time. And at that time, in the mid 2010s, there weren't too many jobs in the Bitcoin space. And I took a couple of jobs used at banks that were trying to play with blockchain related technology. And so that's what I did for almost a decade in Chicago. Was working at banks, and most recently I worked at JP Chase, and I was the technology lead and lead software engineer on building out their digital assets trading network. And so I worked with stablecoins at JP Chase, and there, we built a software tool that trades repurchase agreements. And the idea there is to take tokenized cash versus tokenized treasuries and kind of swap them. And there's atomic swaps involved. And so I have a pretty, deep background in the software development and I'll say Bitcoin adjacent field. But I'm a longtime Bitcoiner and have always thought that the true innovation in the space lies with Bitcoin. And so at the bank, I definitely saw where the blockchain rubber hits the banking road, so to speak. And even though this product that we worked on is in production and moves, a lot of money, I wanted to work on Bitcoin and Bitcoin-related technology. And so last fall, I left the bank to work full-time on Bitcoin. And since that time, I've been working on stable channels.
Great. Okay. So it sounds like I wasn't aware about that background aspect on you. And let's get into the stable channels aspect. I guess you see this as a big opportunity, right? What is the size of this opportunity?
Yeah. So stable coins themselves have grown tremendously. And even before stable coins, there's obviously the US dollar is a huge brand and a huge market. And so there's this concept of Euro dollars, which is folks that outside of the United States who want US dollar exposure. And then, they have US dollar denominated bank accounts in foreign countries, which is kind of crazy to think about. What's it backed by, right? And, now there's stable coins, and stable coins have grown from maybe $10 billion in 2019, 2020 to around $150 billion today. So, it's a tremendously big market, and there are some tremendously profitable companies working on stablecoins and stablecoin technology. But to date, they haven't really been built on Bitcoin rails, and there's a number of challenges from these centralized stablecoins, like risks of bank runs, like Circle experienced with the Silicon Valley Bank. Asset freezes, asset seizures, investigations from law enforcement, all sorts of challenges that the stable coins might face down the road. And they might just kind of face kind of like a dumbing down of their capabilities because they have this centralized choke point.
Yeah, interesting. And so, as you said, it sounds like the traditional legacy fiat system had its own other issues that caused people to use these so-called euro dollars. And I guess, as I recall, maybe around 2014 or 15, Tether was started initially because Bitfinex had issues on their fiat banking side. And that's what it was initially started. And as I understand, it was on Omni to start. And then it's now on all these other, random chains. And we'll get into some of the other contrasting approaches of how people can have a stable value. But let's go into stable channels then. So can you give us a little bit of an overview? What are stable channels? Like, how would we contrast this with some of the other approaches, whether it's like a DLC kind of approach or a stablecoin approach or other various approaches?
So I think first we might kind of categorize it in two buckets. And so there's fiat-backed stablecoins, and then there's cryptocurrency-backed stablecoins. And on the fiat-backed stablecoins, those are the centralized stablecoins that most people know today, like Tether and USDC. And the way those systems work is they mostly run on Ethereum-related technology, and they issue an asset like a token, and that's USDT for Tether. And that token is an IOU for some fiat that's sitting in like a bank deposit. And so that's how they work. And so, the way Tether works mechanically, like the life cycle of a Tether token, is that kind of like bigger players like exchanges might send like a wire transfer from their bank into Tether's bank. I think the minimum might be like something like $100,000. And then the user who creates that mint transaction gets the Tether tokens. And then this, again, might be a big exchange like Binance or something. And then Binance can give those tokens to the users, and those users can trade peer-to-peer without having to do KYC checks or whatnot. It's like when you get like Chuck E. Cheese tokens, and once you have the tokens, you can go play all the games, right? And so that's the real innovation with the centralized stablecoins, is that once you have the token, you can move it really quickly and somewhat easily. Versus if you're not trying to do this all within the banking ecosystem, there'd be basically a KYC check on every single transaction. So that's how fiat-backed stablecoins work, and we covered some of the risks of those. On the other side, there's cryptocurrency-backed stablecoins. And by comparison with fiat stablecoins, these are maybe like only 5 or 10% of the market cap of the fiat stablecoins, which are again around $150 billion. So cryptocurrency-backed stablecoins haven't caught on as much. And the biggest one is probably in the Ethereum ecosystem called DAI. And then in the Bitcoin ecosystem, you mentioned something called DLCs. And DLCs haven't caught on too much either, but the idea with DLCs is to have a counterparty-to-counterparty trade relationship, and then basically you have an oracle that makes sure that one side of that relationship has enough Bitcoin to keep that user stable in dollars, or to satisfy whatever type of derivatives contract that those two peers have. And so I can get into the details of how DLCs work and how they're different with stable channels, or I can talk a little bit more about the stable channels as you wish, Stefan.
Yeah, let's get into the stable channels. I think that's probably the interesting thing for people to understand. And I guess one other small one that people might know in the Bitcoin world is Blink. They have this thing called stable sats.
Right. That's right.
So that's also another model that we might talk about as well, that basically, as I understand, think of it like Blink is kind of having a relationship with the exchange, and they're doing kind of a longing on shorting and things like that. I think it's a short, basically. But they're basically maintaining that position so that their end users can have, in their view, a stable balance, and they can flip between kind of a USD balance and a Bitcoin balance. And so I guess those are kind of the broad buckets, right? Like you've got stable coins like USDT and so on, and they travel on various shit chains like Ethereum and Tron and whatever. You've got this kind of stable sats approach by Blink, and you've got, let's say, the DLC approach. And then, so can you explain to us now where stable channels fits, or how does that work?
Yeah, I'm glad you mentioned stable sats because people always, and that's from Blink, and they always mention that to me. And stable sats is custodial, and then DLCs and stable channels are self-custodial. You have your Bitcoin. So yeah, stable channels is another way to peg a portion of your Bitcoin balance to the value of some external asset, probably dollars. And so the way it works is that in a nutshell, we match up longs and Bitcoin longs. And so those are folks who are willing to like provide that stability service to someone. Like, for example, I want to provide that stability service to you, Stefan. And then we match them up with Bitcoin shorts or stable receivers, stability receivers. And so an example, that might be yourself, Stefan, even though I doubt it.
Yeah.
So the idea...
yeah, but let's go with it. Yeah.
The idea is, okay, so let's say that we both put in 1 Bitcoin into a regular Lightning channel, and Stable Channels uses regular Lightning channels. And then let's say the price is $60,000. So then that means there's 2 Bitcoin in the channel, right? And 1 Bitcoin's on your side and 1 Bitcoin's on my side. And the idea is that we want to keep you stable at $60,000. And, well, that's a challenge, right? Because the Bitcoin price changes all the time. And so how can we keep you stable at $60,000? Well, with Lightning, we have a new capability that has been unlocked, which is like extremely fast payments, extremely fast settlement. And that's the characteristic of Lightning that Stable Channels employs to maintain the peg. And so what we do is we settle very frequently, like every 1 minute. Your Lightning node, Stefan, which is running the Stable Channel software, and my Lightning node, we both independently query the latest price. And we get the price from 5 different exchanges, just like regular price feeds, right? And then we take the median to protect against the median instead of the average, and to protect against some of them being wrong, or compromised. So then if the price of Bitcoin goes down, then it takes more Bitcoin to keep you stable at $60,000, and I send a payment over to you. And if the price of Bitcoin goes up, then it takes less Bitcoin to keep you stable at $60,000, so you send a payment over to me. And so through that, like, just frequent updating of the channel, we keep you stable in terms of the external asset, like the dollar. And in the meantime, we still get a number of the capabilities that Lightning unlocks, like if you wanted to do payments or if we wanted to add other features, we could do that. But the basic mechanism is using that very frequent settlement to keep you stable in dollar terms.
Interesting. Yeah, that's really interesting because I mean, as we've been speaking about, there's all these different approaches, and I guess the other one I should have mentioned as well, and I'm sure you're familiar, is RGB style or Taproot Assets style, which is like another way,
exactly,
which is another way altogether of doing this kind of trying to achieve this. Now, we don't want to get too kind of confused with all the different details, but just I guess the key thing that I'm understanding is with stable channels, it's like you're using the normal Lightning payment mechanism to keep us stable, or let's say in this case, to keep my US dollar value stable in this example. Whereas in the DLC case, as I'm understanding, it's more like they kind of pre-compute and like have all these pre-signed transactions sort of ready, and at the end, you can sort of keep yourself stable that way. So I guess it's kind of technologically a different way of achieving it.
Yeah, so the difference between DLCs and stable channels, it's a technological difference, and then that kind of bleeds over into like an operational differences between the two. Because with DLCs, it's also a 2 of 2 multisig, but it's like they use something called adapter signatures, and so that makes it kind of like a de facto 2 of 3 multisig. And so that means that you really are giving some trust in the price oracle. And so in the case of DLCs, the price oracle actually does a digital signature, right? And then that digital signature is kind of what releases the funds one way or the other. Like they settle the... Now, if both parties are cooperative, then you may not even need to use the price oracle. But in the DLC model, you do need to involve a price oracle, and you need to kind of have their cooperation, right? Because they need to know what they're assigning. And, I'm not sure that the price oracle ecosystem has developed quite yet for the DLC-based approach. And then, so with DLCs, though, you might be able to get like better precision of your trade outcome, assuming you have a trusted oracle and technologically things work quite well. So unlike DLCs, stable channels don't involve the price oracles with a digital signature. We just use price feeds, price exchange feeds, like regular HTTPS calls for the techies out there. In that case, you get the information to your node, and ultimately, you really do always have custody of your funds, and your node makes the stable channel software makes the final decision whether or not I want to send that payment over to you, because stable channels is kind of like stability as a service. It's like an ongoing streaming type of relationship versus DLCs, which might be set for a period of time, and you use the oracle to kind of adjudicate the dispute one way or the other.
I see. Yeah. And so in the stable channel case, let's say you and I, we set up this channel, as we said. What happens when we disagree? Like if my node somehow disagrees with your node about the correct price, how does it work?
Yeah, so I think there's a couple of cases. Kind of like Lightning channels today, I think stable channels might work best between cooperative actors and people who, that you already know or that you have a decent reputation with, or service providers, right? If it were the case that like Phoenix were closing everybody's channels all the time, then it wouldn't work. And it's the same with Lightning. So yeah, in the case of stable channels, each node has their own version of the truth. And so, if there's some sort of agreement, and I know you, then I can call you. If there's some sort of agreement and I really don't, and we're just two randos on the internet or we'll say pseudonymous folks on the internet, then the normal channel closure procedures with Lightning would proceed. And so either, I can say, hey, let's mutually close this channel, or if you're truly uncooperative, and I notice that, for example, you aren't paying me when the price goes against you, but I'm paying you when you can kind of see what's going on, right? Because of the frequent settlement. In that case, then you can do a unilateral close and exit the channel the regular way with the Lightning network technology.
Gotcha. Just like you would close a normal Lightning channel. Gotcha.
Exactly.
So we can basically think of it like a special Lightning channel that we open between us. That's really what it is, right? But you need this additional software on the side of your standard Lightning implementation to make this work, obviously.
That's exactly right.
Okay, so let's talk a little bit about the failure modes or the downside aspects of it. One I can think of is probably similar to the DLC case, where there's a limit to the amount of price movement that we can handle, right? Like especially if the price were to rapidly double or to rapidly halve, or is it, I guess it's doubling or halving. I guess those are kind of the limits, right?
The halving is the trouble.
Right.
Yeah.
Right.
So in the case where we put in 1 Bitcoin each, and the price was to begin at $60,000, and the idea was to keep you at $60,000, let's take 3 different scenarios. Let's say after 1 month, in the first scenario, the price didn't move at all. All right. Well, then in that case, all right, everything's fine. You still have 60. Right? Exactly. No, the price didn't change at all.
No change. Yeah.
Right. All right. Now let's take another scenario where the price doubled. And so that means the price is now $120,000. And that means that there's still 2 Bitcoin on the channel, right? And that means that there's $240,000 total in the channel. And you still have $60,000 on your side. And that would equate to 1/2 of 1 Bitcoin. So you've lost Bitcoin, right? But you've kept your stability.
And to be fair, that's because I wanted stable value, right? So that's fair enough in this case. Yeah.
Exactly.
Yeah.
And on the other hand, I had the leverage long position, and I now have 1.5 Bitcoin, which is $180,000.
Yeah,
exactly. I did well on that, and you got what you wanted, I guess. And so maybe it's better than selling, and who knows, So now, okay, so that's the second scenario, is the price doubled. All right, now let's take the case where the price halved. And so in that case, now the price of Bitcoin is $30,000. and there's still 2 Bitcoin in the channel. So 30,000 times 2 is $60,000. That means all the 2 Bitcoin on your side of the channel, right? And in that case, there's just not enough more. There's no more Bitcoin in the channel to keep
channel to make me whole. Yeah,
exactly right. And so then that's a failure scenario, right? If the price of Bitcoin plummets, then there's just not enough. There's just not enough there to keep anybody stable, right? And so there's a few ways to handle that. It's probably not, the price is probably not going to plummet 50% overnight. And so we can do some things like we can splice more capacity into the channel.
Right. As in, it's kind of like you're about to get liquidated and you add more collateral to the loan.
Exactly.
It's a similar dynamic to that, right? So I guess what you're saying is like you might splice in, let's say if it's rapidly dropping, I might need to talk to you and be like, hey, Tony, I need you to add more to your side of the channel. So, is it something like that?
That's exactly right. You can think of it kind of like as a margin call. And another way to handle this is to open another channel with a different counterparty. Another way to handle it is if the price goes down too much and you don't like it, then you can close the channel. You can go into Tether at that point. There's all sorts of stuff you can do because again, they're just regular Lightning channels. So you can do what you want. As far as making a product out of it and like making that a nice experience for people so it's intuitive, that's yet to be determined.
Back to the show in a moment. This show brought to you by CoinKite.com, the creators of the best Bitcoin hardware security devices such as the Cold Card Mark IV and the new Cold Card Q. Now, we use Bitcoin hardware security devices to keep our keys offline, our private keys offline. Now, the way these work is you can do that setup, write down your 12 or 24 words on the seed word cards, and keep that secure. Now, you can use this device to interact with the Bitcoin network using software such as Sparrow Wallet, Electrum, or Vector Desktop, or Nunchuck as a few examples. Now, you have a range of security features that you can use with these devices, such as passphrases, you can use seed XOR, or my favorite is multi-signature. Now, if you're starting in a basic way, just start with the device and the USB-C cable, plug it directly to the computer and use it that way, and then later improve your setup. But I believe these devices are great at helping secure your coins, especially as you start to migrate up into multi-signature security. But don't be disheartened or don't be scared away. They are accessible, and I think you actually do learn about Bitcoin in the process. So to get yours, go to coinkite.com, use code Livera to get a discount on your cold card. This show also brought to you by mempool.space, the leading Bitcoin and blockchain visualizer. I use it all the time when I'm checking transaction fees and trying to understand what is the state of Bitcoin's mempool. You can search transactions, historical as well as unconfirmed ones, and also see a great way to visualize things across the Lightning Network, Liquid, mining, and so much more. Also, for those of you with an enterprise, they offer a mempool.space enterprise program. So for those of you as part of that enterprise program, you might want to get increased API limits, and you might want to have increased access to the team in terms of feature requests. You might want to have special branding in terms of how your custom instance of mempool.space looks. So to sign up for that, go to mempool.space/enterprise. And now, back to the show. Yeah, I see. And so in terms of people finding each other, I guess, let me put it this way. Is there also an element where we have to consider the right user, right? And in general, in life, you got to choose the right tool for the job. So I think one thing that's becoming clear is not all 8 billion people will be able to self-custody, right? Like at least with current technology, with current constraints, and that basically implies certain trade-offs about who is realistically going to hold coins on chain and be able to access the chain, right? And people talk about that number, let's say it's somewhere between 10 to 100 million people, or at least users of the chain. And so does that mean then this kind of product or software, this tool, is ideal to be used by larger nodes, whether they are lightning banks, let's call them, or whatever we're calling them, or high net worth individuals, because it's not for people who can't afford to hit the chain, basically. That's the short version. That's the constraint, isn't it?
That's exactly right. And so insofar as these are regular Lightning channels, you have all of the challenges that Lightning has today. And so, yet you may be the victim of high fees. You need to run some software, like there's some edge cases with Lightning. You need to be always online is another challenge specifically with stable channels. And so to date, this technology like Lightning is most suitable for technical node runners, for Lightning businesses, for wallet developers, folks who are already comfortable running nodes. The hope with Lightning and with stable channels, as kind of piggybacking on all of the great progress that we hope Lightning will make, is that there will be innovations that make all of that a little bit easier. And so, I do think that Lightning has seen quite significant incremental progress in making things more usable, more robust, and reliable. And then looking to the future, perhaps things like channel factories might be a case where you can do bulk opens of channels. And so in the case of cooperation, things are pretty good, and you don't hope. And the idea is that you might not have to go to the chain too often. But you're right. To date, running Lightning channels for the most part is more suitable for more sophisticated actors.
Yeah, I see. So, I mean, gaming it out, or as an example, it might be a case where a service provider does this stable channel software to provide that for their end users, right? In the same way that, Blink does this now for their end users who are, to them, they're just custodial users on the app, whatever, but the service provider is able to give them a stable value feature.
Yeah, so, I think it could take a few different approaches, ideally, users could have it on their phone, and they could take either side of the trade and have like Lightning nodes basically running on their phone. I think like a mobile first Lightning,
Right, like a Phoenix or a Zeus or a Mutiny kind of thing.
Yeah, I mean, I think a mobile first self-custodial Lightning experience is something that we should strive for, and so that's ideal. But again, I don't think we're quite there yet. And so in that case, then yeah, it might be folks, I'll give you one example where some folks are running a Lightning channel, a stable channel, and then issuing eCash tokens to users. And so those eCash tokens are like IOUs for the dollar value of the stability side of that stable channel. So that's like a use case. That's the Boardwalk Cash application that some folks may have seen out there.
Yeah.
And so that's like an interesting application where, some of the complexity is taken away from the user, of course, at the cost of self-custody.
Yeah, I see. So yeah, there's a range of different uses there that we don't really know exactly where it'll all be used. I know Kale I think he was tweeting about this Boardwalk Cash use case. And there are people doing things on like Nostra and trying to like encrypt eCash to someone's Nostra pub key and things like this. And so maybe this could be some part of that overall, let's say, stack or puzzle that they're underlying. They are using a stable channel to give them a stable dollar balance, if that's what the users want. Obviously, there are obviously those of us who just want to stay Bitcoin denominated all the way, and so be it. But I guess there's also, as you said, there's two sides to the trade here. So there may be opportunities where the person who's willing to, it's like a maker-taker kind of idea, right? Like if somebody else wants to be the taker and they want stable value, there might be an opportunity for somebody else to be the maker, and to maybe they make something out of that.
That's right. And so kind of the way that has resonated for some Bitcoiners is that a lot of Bitcoiners see that stable coins are tremendously popular and want to have some type of like Bitcoin first solution for that. And so some folks kind of like the idea of shouldering the volatility for other users. And, if you're providing stability, then you're going, what is in effect 2x leverage long with your Bitcoin. And so, for most people, I would recommend just like stack sats and put it in cold storage. But for folks who already have a healthy stack, And, maybe they don't want to go to an exchange to purchase more Bitcoin. Maybe they want to support the liquidity of the Lightning Network. And, maybe they want to get more Bitcoin exposure in a different way that remains self-custodial versus using a KYC exchange, for example. Then, stable channels might be something they might want to look into because they can support the liquidity of the Lightning Network. And then they can also, of course, shoulder volatility for other users and potentially earn more Bitcoin if the price goes in their favor.
Yeah, I see. And so, as you said, it's kind of like going 2x long. So I guess there is a chance of kind of getting wrecked, but it's kind of like the similar margin call dynamic that if the price were to drop rapidly, at that point, you need a way to splice in more Bitcoin. And so is splicing already built into this already, or is that kind of a future feature that you're looking to do?
Yeah, so the state of, it really requires both dual funding and splicing to make this end-to-end self-custodial. Because in our example, when we both put in one Bitcoin, Stefan, it'd be great if we could just start that as a dual funded channel and everything's balanced and we're ready to go.
Yeah, gotcha. Yeah.
Yeah, and so I have implemented the dual funding with the core Lightning, but the whole user onboarding flow is still a little challenging for that. And so dual funding and splicing specifically, I would look at core Lightning, which stable channels run. That's a Lightning Network implementation. It's like a code base. And then the other one is Eclair and Phoenix. They've done really well in being forward thinking on dual funding and splicing. But LND, on which most Lightning nodes run today, do not support dual funding and splicing quite yet. So I still think there's a lot of innovations coming down the Lightning pike. And and I'm really looking forward to more wide adoption of dual funding and splicing. I know LDK has got that on their roadmap, and they want to implement it quite quickly.
Yeah, so as you're saying, it depends on the implementations, at least for today. And so the other question I'd have is, how are these stable channel users or people who want to either the maker side or the taker side, how are they going to find each other? Is there going to be some kind of public notice board, or is it kind of like at a protocol level? Do we need an app for this? How does that work?
Yeah. Right now, the technology is back-end technology. So again, it's more suitable for sophisticated actors. But the vision is to create a marketplace for the folks who want to provide the stability and folks who want to receive the stability. And so let me throw an interesting aside in here. So normally, if you want to go leverage long Bitcoin, you might say I had my one Bitcoin and I wanted to go 2x leverage long. I might deposit that to an exchange like Binance, and I might do a derivative product called a perpetual swap, and basically just click a 2x button, right? And so that means that I get the price exposure as if I had 2 Bitcoin, even though I only had 1 Bitcoin. And so in effect, Binance has lent me that 1 Bitcoin. But I have to pay Binance for that privilege. And that
funding
is
rate.
Yeah, that's called a funding rate. And so in the case of stable channels, I think there will be a pricing mechanism for folks who want to either receive or provide the stability. So in the case of Bitcoin, most of the time, the funding rate is positive. That means that the longs pay the shorts, over 70% of the time. And normally that's 10 to 20% interest. So that might kind of sweeten the deal a little bit for folks who might want to engage in keeping this. Because, Stefan, if you're keeping your $60,000 stable, you might earn something if you want to keep the stability, I would pay you because I'm getting the leverage long, right? And so, the plan the plan is to add in that interest rate, right? And so back to your question about how folks might find each other. I mean, I think there's 2 basic ways. One is centralized service, a website or app, and the other is using some of these decentralized services of course, I'll point to Nostr as one, but I'll also point to the Lightning Network itself. And the Lightning Network itself already has concept of like liquidity ads, and there's already messages that go back, a lot of gossip messages go back and forth on the Lightning Network that users might not be aware of quite yet. But implementing a marketplace so that folks can find each other, and then implementing interest rates to modulate the demand for receiving stability or providing stability are two really important developments that I hope to get to.
Yeah, interesting. And so, as you said, it's kind of like flipping the dynamic in terms of funding rate, because normally, as you said, you would normally, if you were, a trading guy yourself, or you're interested in this, you might take some of your coins to Binance, Bitfinex, or whoever, and pay a funding rate. And in this case, it's kind of like you're going the other way, and now the person who wants stability is actually the one paying you. So in that example,
let me rephrase that. So normally it would be, I don't know which way the payments are going to go first of all, because it's going to be market driven, right? And so on the one hand, say I got my one Bitcoin, right? I can go to Binance, but I want more Bitcoin exposure, right? And so then I'm going 2x leverage long Bitcoin. I have to pay Binance for that extra Bitcoin exposure. That's like one use case. Another use case is that you want the dollar, the stable dollar exposure. And with the stable dollar exposure, like you already have Bitcoin, Stefan, in your example, and that Bitcoin looks juicy, and I want more of that Bitcoin, right? On me, right? The leverage long side. So we might be able to come into like a mutual agreement where I take your Bitcoin upside and downside, right? I'm providing you the stability, and yet I'm also getting 2x. You essentially are like the Binance in this case, right? You're providing me your Bitcoin exposure, and so for that honor, I may say, all right, well, we settle this stable channel every 1 minute. I'm going to add in a 10% interest rate on that payment and pay you every minute, right? Because you're giving me, you see what I'm saying? So that's how the mechanics may work. Now, the market is not always long. The funding rates are not always positive. In some cases, when the price is going down a lot, it's actually the case that the payments go the other way. And so, because nobody wants to be in Bitcoin, the price is dropping. And so in that case, then for the honor of the stability, you may have to pay me. But I hope that's not all too confusing for your listeners.
Yeah, I gotcha. Yeah, no, that makes a lot of sense. Okay, so what we would hypothesize, let's say, is that in most cases, you, the maker, are actually going to be paying the stability receiver, but in certain times, it's going to be the other way around, and I would be paying you in this example. Yeah, interesting. So there's a lot to think about, but fascinating. And so I guess, obvious questions people will have are kind of like, oh, is this the next Terra Luna, right? Like they're going to think, is there going to be some, but I guess you could counter it and say, look, actually, this is not like one big overall stability pool. Actually, it's more like all these channels to each other. And so certainly if some of those channels get wrecked because, the big price moves, so be it. That's what you opted into. But it's not like one big pool. And obviously with Do Kwon and all the fraud and stuff, that's another whole aspect. But I guess people will have that association in their mind, won't they? They'll think, oh, is this, you're trying to do this algorithmic stablecoin thing? Hasn't that already been tried and failed before?
Yeah, it's a great point. And so I don't think of this as a stable coin. There's no issued token on the back of it. It's just people doing freedom stuff with freedom money, Bitcoin. And it remains self-custodial at all times, right? And so that's another key difference between, all the other centralized stablecoins, at least. And so I'll just point out that it's also part of the beauty of Bitcoin's design from a technology standpoint, is that there's not really like a centralized, like with these Ethereum contracts, for example, like, there's like these ERC20 contracts, and all of the data is in there, and like if there's a bug, then they get wiped out, or not even just a bug, but like an operational error or an inside job kind of thing. But with Bitcoin, these channels, they all have their self-contained state. They all have their little UTXO on the blockchain, and they are independent of each other. And so as you mentioned, that's a really nice characteristic of Lightning channels, because it's a truly radically decentralized network versus these other kind of stability pools or more centralizing forces, which, again, can have some like operational errors that make things don't go as well as we please. So I'm hoping that when Bitcoiners think about building Bitcoin stability tools or Bitcoin-backed dollars, we think about trying to keep things self-custodial and think about the really remarkable characteristics of Lightning that make it more robust for like planning out a longer-term solution that can be robust against, be it regulatory burdens, be it inside jobs, be it operational errors and whatnot. But it's another reason that I'm really bullish on Lightning.
Back to the show in a moment. The lead sponsor of this show is Swan.com, and Swan has a mission to onboard millions of people into Bitcoin. I also work at Swan, helping on some educational content for the team. Now, the team have also put out a new version of the Swan Bitcoin application, which is available on your smartphone, whether it's Apple or Android. Now, this app has a really fast onboarding experience. It's now just a few minutes to go from zero to Bitcoin. So if you are standing there with your family or friends and you might have been having trouble trying to get them onboarded, well, try this now. Recommend Swan Bitcoin. And you can do this while you're standing next to them. They can click through, and most of them will be able to set up and do this in just a few minutes. Also, the team at Swan have rolled out a new promotion. There are 0 fees on your first $10,000 of Bitcoin buys. So this is a great way to go from zero to Bitcoin, and in a guided and managed way. So reminder, go to your App Store or Play Store and search Swan Bitcoin to get onboarded with Bitcoin today. And now, back to the show. Yeah, so I guess it's just offering another possibility of how to do this kind of stable value, fiat value, let's say, tokens. Because, as we've spoken about, there are there's a whole spectrum of different approaches, right? You've got this kind of tether and circle style using, shit chains like Ethereum and Tron, but having kind of, they could still be shut down by the state, right? Like the state can just, say, hey, we don't want... Yeah, because ultimately, the state can just sort of say, we don't care what's happening on these shit chains, just like stop, whoever's holding the US government bonds, which are underlying that. And then I guess when you're thinking about, let's say, stable sats, that's ultimately, Blink and them who are doing that relationship with, let's say, an exchange. And then when you think about DLCs, it's kind of more about the Oracle and... that other component to it. And then so when it comes to stable channels, I guess it's more just like, I'm trying to think about where's the main kind of point of failure here? Like, is it just that I guess it's maybe there's more technicality involved to it, that you have to be able to hit the chain here periodically. So you need to be rich enough to afford that. Like, it's not necessarily for the small value users. I would say that's probably one of the, let's say the caveats here. And you need to be online. You need to be kind of running this software, checking the price of Bitcoin and making sure that you're still, updating the state of your channel. Right.
Well, yeah, and it also has a lot of the challenges of Lightning. One area of Lightning development that I'd like to see more work on is key management. And so with Lightning, you have your keys online, and I don't think we've quite figured out how to secure those keys in a way that at least that I'm satisfied with. And there are some developments in that space, but if we're talking about putting I don't know what the capacity of Lightning Network is today, but it's 300, 400 million versus these stable coins, which are $150 billion plus. So if we're talking about putting a lot more money on Lightning, I think it's a matter of better key management. I think it's a matter of just ironing out all of the different edge cases that there are, which the Lightning developers are working on. And Lightning's pretty complicated software. There's just a big flip when you run it. There's just a big footprint and a lot of messages getting passed back and forth. So those operational risks are all something to consider. But conceptually, my hope, and I think the hope of the Lightning developers, is that these are pretty well-known problems insofar as there's nothing that's going to come out of the blue and totally surprise us with vanilla Lightning channels. And so it's a matter of kind of just heads down engineering to continue to work through these challenges, and also to of course iron out some of the UI UX problems so as we can make self-custodial Lightning more attractive to folks. One other kind of like risk of stable channels is, of course, that your channel partner just misbehaves and leaves. But as you mentioned, the runner of the stable channel needs to be technologically competent enough, or the software needs to be good enough to be able to handle either mutual close or forced closure in the event that your channel partner is not doing what they say they were going to do.
Right. And as you said, there's going to be some reputation involved in it as well, that you weren't, maybe it's not just like total randos, it's more like known entities or people with a reputation.
Exactly.
One other question and aspect to dig into is, while this stable channel is open and operating, can we still make payments in and out of it? Or is it more like, no, it's only for the stable value and nothing else?
Yeah, so this brings up a really interesting line of thought. Conceptually, yes, you can make payments out of it. That's something that I'm working on. And so it's just really a matter of, like if you had your $60,000 stable channel, Stefan, and you wanted to make a $1,000 payment out, it's just a matter of us saying, all right, well, I'm going to drop you down to 59,000, right? But then it also kind of like affects on the other side how much like collateral I have, right? Because now I have 61,000, right? So there's some matters to think about there, but conceptually, it should be no problem. It should be feasible to be able to do payments from like a phone, and have your dollars on your phone and send payments out and like readjust the stable channel. Okay. It brings up something else interesting, which is that in the case that I gave to you, Stefan, you had $60,000 of Bitcoin, right? And we were keeping you stable at $60,000. Another way to think of that is that I was keeping you stable at $60,000 and 0 Bitcoin. Okay, so I'm just going to say the punchline now. The punchline is that we can add trading to these channels, and so now instead of being kept stable at $60,000 and 0 Bitcoin, you can send a message to me and say, "Hey, Tony, keep me stable at $30,000 and 0.5 Bitcoin, 1/2 of 1 Bitcoin, right?" And so in essence there, and that still adds up to 1 Bitcoin. So on my side, I might say, fine. I might say, all right, fine, but I'm going to charge you a, 0.1% trade processing fee or something like that. But you see what happened. You went from $60,000 exposure to now $30,000 exposure and 1/2 of 1 Bitcoin. And so it's a way to, it's a way to do like in-channel trading, or maybe you want to be stable in a different type of asset like the S&P 500. And maybe as the provider of that service, I'm okay to do that. So it's all sorts of interesting things that we can do inside of these stable channels.
Fascinating. And so, but then in that example, you are no longer 2x long, right?
I'm no longer 2x long.
So I guess, right? So now you're kind of also sharing some of the Bitcoin risk, where previously, I'm getting confused. But basically, you were initially 2x long in the example, right? And then now that we've cut it down, are you...
Yeah, the leverage ratio would definitely change. But the leverage ratio would change even in the base case, because let's say the price of Bitcoin is dropping let's just take the normal example with no confusion in there. So in the normal case, when you're stable at $60,000 and the price is going down and down and down, my leverage ratio is going up and up and up because actually, I have less Bitcoin, right? And so that's just another aspect of the technological design that people are going to have to suss out.
Yeah. So maybe they'd have to like set their parameters of like what are they comfortable with in terms of in-channel trades, or this kind of how much leverage ratio am I okay with, like within these bands. And if it goes outside of these bands, okay, we're going to shut the channel down, or we're going to send a message and say, hey, I want to stop it now, that kind of thing.
Well, I think the big picture, Stefan, is that like for most folks, for a lot of folks, people are turned off by Bitcoin because it's too volatile. It's just too volatile for them. And I understand that because you have to pay your bills next month, or you have the US dollar denominated debts that you have to pay, and you just can't tolerate, the price going up and down 20%, et cetera, et cetera. So I think it would behoove the Bitcoin ecosystem if we can develop better tools for users to get stability. And it doesn't even necessarily have to be all dollar stability or all Bitcoin, right? The idea is that we can let users kind of customize their volatility preferences by using Bitcoin. And the tools to do that on Bitcoin, I think, are there. We have created the best payment network ever existed and the best money ever existed. And so we can kind of like, we can eat up fiat inside of Bitcoin. We can bring the stablecoin liquidity into the Lightning Network and into Bitcoin. And it's going to take some engineering work, but ultimately I think that we'll be able to give users more functionality, more usability by using the Bitcoin tools that we already have today.
Interesting. And so would you also view it as a quasi-decentralizing exchange in that sense?
I think so. Because there will be some aspect of price involved. And that's the price of either providing or receiving this stability. And or alternative, providing the stability. Another way to think about that is going leverage long Bitcoin. And that's already priced. Like the Bitcoin derivatives market is a lot bigger than the Bitcoin spot market already today. And so most of that use is captured by centralized exchanges. Some of it's on decentralized exchanges, and those decentralized exchanges are on, mostly Ethereum-based rails. I think that Bitcoin is really great collateral for derivatives positions, and with Lightning we can settle it like that quick. And this is, I mentioned at the start of the episode, I worked at JP Chase, and you just don't have those capabilities in traditional finance to do such frequent settlement and to have such a reliable collateral asset as Bitcoin. So I think that doing a more derivatives trading, and again, I'm focused on the US dollar experience specifically, but I think that's all quite feasible with what we've built out with Lightning so far.
Interesting. And so would you say, I guess maybe we're getting more to a broader conversation about Lightning Network. Do you believe it is actually cheaper to use the Lightning Network than to use legacy fiat banking rails? Or is it actually going to be that it might be more expensive because you're paying for some level of censorship resistance, and there's that risk that you may need to hit the chain, these kinds of things?
Oh my gosh. Yeah, it's a good question. And so let's take the example, like if we wanted to launch like a centralized stablecoin, well, you would need to have those banking relationships, and you would need to have a bank charter. And, these are all rules that keep out new entrants and new competition from the banking system or from like the legacy system writ large. And with stable channels, anybody who can run a Lightning node can provide or receive stability as a service. And so in that respect, Lightning and Bitcoin are just orders of magnitude cheaper than getting started with some type of centralized stablecoin offering. From a user perspective, I am not sure that Bitcoin will be able to be simpler or cheaper than centralized options. And that's just for technological reasons that are well documented in the Bitcoin community and that we've already talked about. Like you need to pay on-chain fees, right? And you need to run software, and all of that stuff is kind of challenging. So from an individual user perspective, to use Bitcoin is probably going to be more expensive than starting an account at a bank or just receiving services from a centralized stablecoin provider. But from like an operational business perspective, I'll say, I think it'd be a lot cheaper to use Bitcoin and Lightning tools. So I think that's kind of how I might respond to that.
And then it also we might start to see, and I'm sure you're seeing some of this as well, this kind of jurisdictional arbitrage game aspect, right? So as an example, I saw even just today, Killian from Bolts.exchange did a thread kind of talking about how he set up in El Salvador, and he was comparing it back to Germany and looking at, okay, look, they got this MiCA regulation, and their approach is obviously they're using like liquid swapping in and out and Lightning and this kind of thing, but set up in El Salvador, that might be an interesting model that if some of these approaches like stable channels and so on can be set up in jurisdictions where maybe you just don't have to touch a fiat legacy bank and you're just doing it online. And so maybe there's like like you're saying, like a business operation way that it can be cheaper because of the jurisdictional setup.
Yeah, I think so. And I'm really looking forward to some of the jurisdictional competition in the coming years as Bitcoin becomes more expensive. Yeah, the nice thing about stable channels is that it's all Bitcoin under the hood, and it's all self-custodial. And so they say that possession is 9/10 of the law, and you have possession of your Bitcoin. If you're trying to offer a service where you're giving stability to other folks and issuing some type of token on Bcash token on top of it or something like that, then that gets a lot more challenging, of course, from a regulatory standpoint. And frankly, as it should, because you're custodying other people's assets, and so you should take steps to safeguard that.
Yeah. So I guess the main challenge at this stage is more like usability, right? Because there'll be there's only, as you said, you need to be technologically sophisticated. You might need to have a minimum level of capital for this to make sense, right? Like if you've only got $500 in Bitcoin, it's not really, it's not really going to cut the mustard here. So you kind of, once you cut down on those, what percentage of the population can realistically use this, tech savvy, has enough capital, wants Bitcoin exposure, or wants to, it's a small number of people or businesses who would realistically use this. Now, that said, it could be that, those 10 million Lightning banks, and those Lightning banks want some kind of stable channel feature, and they want to offer that to their end user customers. So maybe that's kind of one of the ways it goes. But I guess for now, the usability is maybe a bit more challenging, right?
Yeah, I think that's kind of like messaging that I might apply to the broader Bitcoin ecosystem, is to be self-sovereign, and there's still usability challenges. And as a Bitcoiner, I think what makes a Bitcoiner is someone who thinks that like 99% of the benefits to humanity are in the future. We've only just cracked 1% of the benefits, 1% of the usability, 1% of the products that will be built on top of it. So with something like Lightning and with something like stable channels, we need to take stock of where we are now from a usability perspective, but also have a vision to the future and be optimistic about that future and build towards it. So I take your point that right now we're working through all of the usability challenges, and there's a sliver of the population that wants to use stable channels or Lightning or Bitcoin for that matter. But the future is bright and orange.
Fantastic. Well, I think that's a great spot to finish up. Tony, before we let you go, where can people find you online?
You can find me on Twitter, and you can also find more links and resources about stable channels at stablechannels.com. There's a form at the top. You can get in touch with me. I'll also be at the Bitcoin Nashville conference in a couple weeks. If anybody wants to connect, just send me a message.
Fantastic. Well, Tony, thanks for joining me today.
Thank you, Stefan.
I hope you enjoyed the show. If you did, make sure to give it a thumbs up and share it out there with your family and friends. Check out my website at stefanlivera.com, and I will see you in the Citadels.